Okay, so a little introduction about me. I just started at the state office about 3 months ago. I was a former teacher, and I worked as an administrator for about a year in Jordan School District, and I did an internship in Granite School District, so it's kind of like coming home. Last 3 years I've worked in working with professional development grants and helping teachers use data to improve instruction. So I was really glad that they asked me to do this because I feel like I was actually a music teacher in another life. And so I wasn't a math, science, or English teacher, and I have kind of a liberal view of what data is, which I think is really valuable, particularly for community councils, because you guys have a wide variety of data that you can use to see how your students are doing and how your school improvement plans are going. And we're going to be talking a little bit about that. So you're going to have to...
No, I gave you a clicker.
You did? Oh, wonderful.
I'm Technology Natalie. Is it working?
Maybe. I was all excited that I had the power.
Oh, please let it be working. It wasn't working earlier and I had to change
this
something.
one?
It's that one. Okay, we're going to just do a little quick change and it's going to work.
Okay. A quick I'm trying to remember what my next slide is. Okay. So a quick overview. We're going to talk about why we use assessments, data, and, the changes. Thank you very much.
Sorry, everyone. That's my big drink.
My brother worked in communications. He worked for Channel 5 for a while. And one of those weekends when everybody takes it off like a holiday, he was in charge of doing the camera, and it was kind of funny to watch. Anyway, that's what I feel like. We have changes to accountability and assessment this year. We'll talk a little bit about. We've got some how you can use data in your school plans, and then how understanding your data can also help you with your decision making. We might just skip this part. I kind of wanted to know what kind of questions you have to make sure that we answer those, but for the sake of time and for those of you that are traveling out, here is my email, and if you've got questions, feel free to email me or call me. Email might be better because I'm out of the office working with teachers, but if you've got a specific question, feel free to email me and we'll see if we can get that answered for you. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, good. I'm afraid I'm losing my teacher voice, so I have to keep practicing. All right, so we usually are collecting data for one or all of these three reasons. We are using it to measure something. Usually when we weigh ourselves, we want to know how much we weigh as a measure. So we're putting a number on something that's a little bit abstract, like weight. Why would we measure ourselves? What does that number mean is part of the assessment and evaluation. So that number for me is usually way too high. And we know it's high because of, our health professionals that tell us it's too high. And so because I know the number's too high, then I have to evaluate myself and say, okay, I need to go to the gym more, or I need to eat better. And that would be part of the reason why we measure things. Why we use data in education? Usually to evaluate learning and provide specific feedback both for teachers and students. Measuring student growth and achievement, we're going to be talking a lot about that today. We usually gauge effectiveness of programs and resources as community council members. I think you guys are doing a lot of that. You're going to be spending money, and you want to know whether you're spending your money in an appropriate way. And so you're going to be gathering data to see whether the programs that you're paying for are working and whether their resources are being used wisely. Making instructional and policy decisions, or by informing our practice and driving change. And that's kind of why we call these our school improvement plans, is because we want to make improvement. We want to see change happening in our schools. Assessment data can be very useful. I actually used all of these today, just getting here. I had to use the map because I got lost. And my low gas gauge came on because I just forgot to fill up. So I'm going to have to do that before I go home today. And then I'm tracking my steps on my Fitbit tracker because my weight's too high, so I have to, make sure I'm doing more exercise. But we use data all the time, and it can give us a lot of information about how we're living our lives and how we're doing. Usually in education, we track two different kinds of data. We track demographic data, which gives us descriptives about student populations, about teachers, about our schools. It also gives us achievement data, so we want to know how our students are doing. And we're going to be using both of those a little bit today. Some examples of demographic data that we usually track is, say, school size, what grade students are in, the school location, their attendance, or how often they move in and out of schools, what our teacher qualifications are, how long they've been teaching, whether they have an advanced degree, whether they're endorsed in the subject that they're teaching in. We track a lot about race and ethnicity, and whether our students are fluent in English. We know a lot of our schools are teaching in English, and so if they don't understand English, that can affect their performance. Also, we track a lot about economics and their socioeconomic status. A lot of research shows that students who have more money tend to have more experiences. They have books at home that they can read. They go on field trips with their parents. They go to, I guess not field trips, they're family vacations, right? But they experience things that usually poor kids don't, and so that can affect their performance. Usually for achievement data, we're tracking two different things. We're tracking their mastery, which is basically just a point, a snapshot of how students are doing. A lot of our statewide assessments are what we call summative assessments, which means it happens at the end of instruction of a particular grade or class. And so we want to see how students are doing at the end, which is good to see how we're doing at the end, but then it's also difficult to try and adjust instruction. So we usually will do, say, a formative assessment, which happens earlier, and it could be a quick check. It could be a benchmark that we're hoping our students are meeting. If you do lots of different points, you're measuring frequently, it's easier to show growth, to see how students are changing over time. And that's where a lot of the changes to our accountability and assessment systems are coming from, is because we realize that it's one thing for a student to be proficient, it's another thing for students to be making adequate growth. And we realize that a lot of students are struggling because of various reasons, and it's just not enough that we say, oh, they've all got to be proficient, because that may be an unattainable goal this particular school year. But we can say, well, we want them to be making adequate growth so that maybe in 2 years or 3 years they will be proficient. And that too tends to be a little bit easier to digest and easier particularly for accountability issues. So here's how some of the changes have happened. Because we've been doing accountability or been doing assessment for a number of years, I think we started with the CRT test in the 90s, we've learned a few things. And we learned that assessment needs for different grade levels are different. And so we've got kind of a wide variety of assessments that we use. Those of you that are in elementary schools are probably familiar with the KEEP data, which assesses kindergarten performance, DIBELS, which assesses reading in grades 1 through 3, and RISE, which is our new assessment that is replacing SAGE this year. And there have been some changes. We're only going to assess the RISE assessment in grades 3 through 8 because we realize that students that are in high school or grades 9 and 10 have different assessment needs. And the Utah Aspire Plus is supposed to be an assessment that is going to predict how students are going to do on their college and career readiness assessment. So tonight we're going to spend just a little bit talking about the RISE and Utah Aspire Plus and make sure you guys get out of here on time. So, this is all kind of spurred by the legislature, and they've been making some decisions because they're very concerned about how students are doing in our public schools. The legislature has decreed, I guess is the word, that the Utah State Board of Education will adopt the standards assessment in grades 3 through 8 that measures a student's proficiency in math, English language arts, and science in grades 4 through 8. So you'll notice, I think that's the same as it was last year. Science isn't assessed until grade 4, but we assess English language arts and math in grades 3 through 8. But writing is kind of the big change. So writing was assessed in all grades last year, but this year we're only going to do it in grades 5 and 8. I guess there was some concern that we were assessing too much writing and it was taking too much time. So we decided we're just going to kind of do quick checks in grades 5 and 8 and make sure the writing is still good. We have been putting a lot of money into assessment called Utah Compose so that teachers can still assess writing in their classroom, but we're not tracking that information at the state level. Now, the other criteria that the legislator has said that the tests need to be criterion referenced. Is there anybody that knows what that is? Okay, that's fine. We're actually going to talk a little bit more about that later, so we'll come back to that. It needs to be aligned to the Utah core standards, administered online, and it needs to be computer adaptive. So the RISE test will still be all of those things. It's just changing which grades we're assessing when and which subjects. A couple of other changes we have. We have a new provider. So AIR is the one that provided the SAGE test. This year we have Questar who will be doing our RISE assessment. And because of that, there will be a new interface, a new appearance, and some new software. But the key is that Utah spent millions of dollars developing their assessment items, and Questar will be using our items, and they align to the Utah core. And we are doing our utmost in these last couple months to make sure the items are going to be seen the same way that they were in SAGE, that the students would be able to interact with them the same way they were in SAGE. So it's essentially the same assessment, it just kind of looks a little bit different. One of the big changes though is that the RISE test will be a multi-stage adaptive. So in the SAGE assessment it was an item level adaptive. So they would see one question, and depending on how they did on that question they would get an easier or harder question. This one they're going to get a whole bunch of questions, and then how they do on that set of questions, then they'll get a whole new set of questions. The advantage of that is that we can get scores out faster, is the plan. And so one problem we do have is that because writing is only assessed in grades 5 through 8, 5 and 8, the English language arts items that we used last year were all calibrated with the writing items in them. And so when we pull them out, it's going to change the way that they're functioning. And so we're going to have to go through what we call a standard setting again. So the English language arts scores will be delayed a little bit, unfortunately. But you should be able to get your writing scores and your science scores and your math scores pretty quick, almost right after the test is done. But the test will still be using Utah's item bank. We'll do core standards. We're still going to be tracking student growth. They're going to be tracking their depth of knowledge, and there will be some interim and benchmark assessments available for teachers. All right, so for high school, hopefully some of you are at high schools. We have the focus of the high school assessment is a little bit different. So the legislature says that the high school assessment should be predictive of a student's college readiness as measured by the college readiness assessment, which in the state of Utah, the one that's accepted most often, is the ACT. So Pearson is the company that owns ACT, and they came and did a presentation and they said, we have this product that we use for most 9th and 10th graders. It's called ACT Aspire. And the questions that students are answering in that test gives us a predictability score of how well they're going to do on the ACT, which sounded really interesting, but we weren't sure if the ACT items or questions aligned to the Utah core. And we've spent millions of dollars with the Utah items, and we really like our items, and so we wanted to be able to use some of those items. So we've kind of done a hybrid, which is the Utah Aspire Plus. So it's a combination of Utah items and ACT items. So we will get that predictability score, but we're also assessing the Utah standards. And all of the ACT items have been aligned to Utah standards. So we're really excited about that. There's no other state that's done this before, so there's been a lot of interest about how it goes. And we're excited to see how it goes. So what has changed? So it's a combination of both the ACT Aspire and the Utah items. The subjects that are going to be tested are English, reading, math, and science. And you notice there's no writing assessed either. So again, that's where the Utah Compose comes in. It will be a timed test because the ACT is timed. And so we want to give students as accurate an experience as possible, so we will be timing them. We will get a predictive ACT score in both the subject areas and an overall composite. And it will be a fixed form test, so it's not computer adaptive. Part of that, because it's a time test, students need to be able to take it quickly, and there won't be any open response items, so it'll be mostly multiple choice or true or false. We will have a Spanish trans-adaptive version, which is a little bit better than like a translation, because it takes into account cultural differences that Spanish students have, maybe from their culture and their heritage that they have. They understand those better than some of the English references. And there will be a secure parent portal where parents can log in and access reports. Still aligned to the Utah Core, it will be administered on a computer, and we are going to measure growth between grades 9 and 10. Oh, okay. So the big changes have been with our Utah accountability system. We realized that, again, growth is more important than proficiency, and so a lot of the changes come from growth. So we've also realized that there's some populations in our state that their needs aren't being met. And so the changes have kind of come in an effort to draw out those populations that need a little bit more attention. So particularly, we're going to be measuring English language fluency as measured by the WIDA scores. Students that are taking advanced level courses that help prepare them for college and career, like concurrent enrollment, AP classes, or CTE programs. Also for 11th graders, they're going to be measured on their ACT score that everybody takes in 11th grade. And there's going to be a new report card design. For this year, there will be no overall school grades. So report cards will come out in December, and it'll give us an idea of the different areas that we're measuring, but you're not going to be able to say, oh, I'm an A school, or I'm a D school. The legislature realized there's been a lot of changes, and we're still trying to figure things out, so we get a break from school grading for a year. And more emphasis on growth, I think we talked about. Oh, the reason why I bring this up here is because a new feature of the report card is what we call these self-reported indicators. And they are not included in the overall score, but it is a chance for schools to kind of put their best foot forward and say, yeah, our students are not doing so great on math, but we have a lot of parental involvement at our school. Parents come out to parent-teacher conferences, they come to a lot of activities, and we want to be able to share that with the rest of the state. And so starting tomorrow, I understand, the system should be ready for principals to be able to submit their self-reported indicators. And I think this is a great opportunity for community councils to have a discussion with their principal and decide what they would like to put on their report card and their self-reported indicators. So here's the kind of an overview of elementary and middle school scores. So 37% is proficiency, 37% is growth, and then we have this growth of the lowest 25%. It used to be we are tracking students that weren't proficient, but now we're tracking the lowest 25 students. So if all of your students in the school are proficient, we're still going to be tracking the lowest 25%. And also our English learner progress. If by chance you have less than 10 students at your school that are English learners, then that part will just be taken out and the rest of it is averaged out. And then for high schools, we have proficiency, growth, advanced coursework is 11%. How well the 11th graders did on their ACT is 11%. I can't tell what that one is. That might be the advanced. No, we did that one right there. Can you guys see that? That's a bad color, isn't it? And I don't remember. Oh, that's right. So we are tracking graduation rates. So starting from when they're in 9th grade all the way to 12th grade. Some schools can track a year after that if they get special permission. So here's an example of some of the self-reported indicators. Research shows that there's multiple factors that contribute to student achievement, and we like to be able to highlight each one of those. So you can kind of choose like school level indicators like school climate, student factors such as attendance, their AP class enrollment, performance of student groups, teacher factors like how well they collaborate together, what kind of endorsements they have, instructional practices, whether they're doing high impact instructional practices, parent and family engagement, and equitable and educational opportunities. Those are the different categories. Okay, so what does this mean? How does it guide instruction? There's a lot of data, and there's a lot of different ways to use it. But one thing that's kind of been interesting is, as I've been looking through school improvement plans, there's a lot of different examples of goals. Example number one, we have an elementary school who would like kindergarten through 3rd grade students will master basic reading skills as indicated by the 90% of them reaching proficiency on the Dibbles assessment by the end of the year. Which sounds like a great goal, right? So by the end of the year, 90% of our students are going to be reading at grade level. Now, that's great unless you're a school where, the school that I taught at, where only 30% of our first graders are reading on grade level. That's a huge jump, right? But maybe they're really close to 90%, and that's a really attainable goal. Then this is a really common one, is our schools will improve their SAGE scores by 2% in all subject areas by the end of the school year. Sounds pretty good. Although 2% in all subjects is kind of hard to do. In fact, the state average has been 2%, and it's been interesting to see. Hasn't changed a whole lot. But I think sometimes it's better to do a more specific goal. And here's some examples. So all of our teachers in SAGE tested subjects will have a 40 or higher MGP, which is a median growth percentile, and increase overall proficiency by the end of the school year, I think it's. Oh, that's okay. I think that's what it was. Now, does anybody know what an MGP is? Okay. So we will talk about that a little bit later, but it's interesting that they're focusing on kind of an average and teacher performance. Here's some high school examples. Uh-oh. Now it's not working.
Oh, it's my fault again.
It's all right. There we go. So these are some interesting ones. We will increase the number of students proficient in math by identifying the low-performing students in need of support in secondary math 2 and 3 lab courses. So they're automatically identifying a high-need group. The students with high attendance, now they recognize that students who don't come to school are probably not going to be successful. So we're going to focus on the ones who come to school. In the lab courses, we'll show a 5% increase from pre-test to mid-year, and then a 10% increase from pre-test to end of year. So not only are they doing a summative test and having to wait a couple months to get the scores back, but they're going to track performance periodically throughout the year, which I thought was interesting. Another one is we will increase the number of students enrolled in and receive credit for rigorous college level courses. We will increase the total number of credits earned in the concurrent enrollment courses by 100. Now I think most students get 3 credits per course. So if they get 3 credits, how many students is that to increase it by 100? 33. So 33 students need to take a new course. Now hopefully it's a large school and they don't just have 33 kids in their school. Then everybody would have to take an AP class. But in addition to that, 79% of the 11th and 12th grade students will earn 3 credits in a concurrent enrollment CT or AP courses. Now 79% was kind of an odd number, and I'm actually kind of familiar with this school. They do have a lot of students. They're showing their measures on their PACE school report, and on the school report it shows a percentage of all of the schools in the district and how many classes the students are taking that are considered advanced level. 79% is about a 2% increase, and it puts them right in line with about where the rest of the schools are in the district. So they put a lot of thought into their score and in their goal, and using their data from past years to inform what they're doing this year, which I thought was interesting. So just briefly, we're going to talk a little bit about organizational learning theory, and I'll explain why we care in just a minute. But organizational learning theory actually comes from business, and a good example of this is the difference between Netflix and Blockbuster. Raise your hand if you know anything about Blockbuster. Some of you older people might. Blockbuster hasn't been around for a while, and one of the reasons why is because, we theoretically say, is that they weren't reading the signs. They didn't realize that things were changing and that people were starting to download videos from the internet, and they weren't going to the store to rent videos. But Netflix has internet, and they've kind of adapted their business model based on data they've collected from their constituents. And so that's kind of a good example of how we can use data to change our practice and adapt and kind of help meet the needs of our constituents. So consider for a moment that instead of a business, we're running a school. And members of an organization or a school, which I believe includes our community council members, acquire and use information to change and implement action. So what kind of information are we using and how are we using it? This occurs when the knowledge is distributed across individuals and is embedded in the culture, values, and routines of the organization. It's interesting to see schools who have this culture of data, and they are not afraid to use data, they collect data, they check it periodically, and they use it to inform their practice almost on a daily basis. As opposed to schools that are like, well, I've done this for, 10 years, we're just going to keep doing things the same way we're doing it. There's a lot of change that happens. Data should be at the heart of strategic decision making, and should be used to answer questions such as, what can we learn about student achievement from data? What does the data tell us about our school improvement goals? How can we change our practice in light of the data? And what other data do we need to collect? Now, as a former music teacher, I do have a very liberal idea of what data is. So yes, statewide assessments are very useful, and they should be looked at, and we should be aware of what the scores are. But as some of you probably already know, it is just a snapshot of where students are doing. And so we should be collecting data periodically throughout the school year. There's lots of different forms of data. We could be collecting meeting notes to see what we're talking about. We could be collecting observations, like teachers can be collaborating on lesson plans. There's lots of different types of data that can be collected to show how our students are doing. Portfolios have been a really popular one, so we can see student work, performance evaluations, that sort of thing. So there's lots of different things. But usually it does require some kind of knowledge about math and statistics. Now, particularly if you're using what we call quantitative data, which has numbers in it. What does it mean to be data literate, do you think? Yeah. Very good. So, do we understand what it means? What is it telling us? If you're literate, you can read text and understand the story, right? So if you're data literate, then you can read the data and understand what it's telling us. So because of that, just like when you're reading your book, you kind of understand vocabulary. So there's a couple of terms that we use quite regularly in assessment that are helpful to understand. What is a norm reference test? Anybody know? I know it's late. All right, so I'll just tell you the answer. Norm reference is where your report says you get your score back and it tells you how well you did compared to other students who took the test. ACT is a norm reference test, so it'll tell you kind of a percentile or a quartile, and if I did really well, I'm in the 99th percentile. So I did better than 99% of the students who took the test. Criterion reference. What's criterion reference? Yes, right. We're here, yep. Yep, so we're at it. So it is, instead of saying how well we did compared to other students, we're saying how well we did to a set criteria or a set standard. Most of our state level assessments are criterion referenced, so that's where our proficiency scores come in. We established a proficiency, so we said we want students to be able to reach this spot, this level, this score. We had experts, usually educators, that came in and are looking at the data, and they're saying a student who is proficient in 5th grade math should be able to answer these questions, should be able to understand these concepts, and they all match these standards. Now, everybody can be proficient, or nobody can be proficient, and that's okay. That's just the way things happen. So, what is the raw score?
Just the score you got with no...
Good. Yep. So, for example, Utah became a state in 1896. True or false?
True.
Very good. I only know that because it's on my ID tag and the state seal of Utah. It says 1896. So I get to look at it every day. So, if you got it right, give yourself a point. That's your raw score. 1 point. Composite score. What's the composite score?
Score in multiple areas.
Very good. So your composite score on the ACT would be a combination of your English score, your reading score, your math score, and your science score. Will give you a composite score. And that will give you your overall. 18 is our benchmark. If you get an 18 on the ACT, then you are college and career ready. Yay! Scale score. What's the scale score? Actually, 18 is a scale score. So we take the raw score and we convert it into a scale that makes sense and can be compared to different assessments. They're all on the same scale. Sometimes we do that compared to other students who took the test. Sometimes we do that for percentiles, so we know that percentiles are a scale. It just depends on what the assessment is and what we're looking at. Proficiency levels, I think we talked a little bit about that. So we take the scale score and we kind of establish cut points, and we say students who are proficient are going to have to meet a score of 567 or something like that. And then subcategories, usually for like math, we're assessing certain concepts, so we're assessing whether they can add or subtract, divide. Those would be some of the subcategories in a math assessment. One thing that I want to show you really fast is the student growth percentiles. So like we said, we're tracking a lot of student growth, and one way we've done that is this is our growth scale, or our percentage numbers. So an overall view of how a student did from one year to the next. So we take how they did last year, and we compare it to other students who scored the same way last year, and then how well they did this year. If they did it compared to the rest of the students, like if they all scored a 3, they were all proficient, and then how well they did this year, if they moved, did a lot of growth, if their score was a lot higher than the rest of their peers last year, then they would have a higher SGP, and if they didn't, then they'd have a lower SGP. So it really just depends, and if you're a 4 last year and a 4 this year, you could have a low SGP or you could have a high SGP, depending on how well you did compared to your peers. And about 40 represents an average growth or about 1 year of learning. And
His was an 80, you just couldn't see it on.
oh yes, so these guys are probably about the same proficiency level, but he made a lot of growth and she didn't. Let's see, MGPs are kind of a composite or average of all of the student growth percentiles in a group, so you could do it in a class or in a school or in an ethnicity group. It just depends on how you want to calculate it. This is actually calculated at state level, and you can see it in the data gateway.
Do you want to go there now?
Yeah.
We're going to try and go there now.
Okay. Now, I was kind of surprised at how much information you can access through Data Gateway without having to have a login. So if you're a parent, you can just look it up. Let's go quickly to the Sage under Assessment button. It says Sage, click on that. Oh, datagateway.schools.utah.gov. And if you're not here, Utah, U-T-A-H.
Okay.
Yeah, you might be on like the login page, or are you trying to get it from the school? Okay. Do you have an educator account? Okay. Come see me afterwards and we'll connect you with somebody who can get that set up for you or get it fixed. Okay, so.
I'm trying how to share this with my friends on the web. They can't see it.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to try and go through this. So in Data Gateway, you can see these are the state averages of how many students are proficient on language arts, math, and science. So in 2018, 45% of our students were proficient in language arts. If you go back to the main page, there's what we call student growth, and it actually tracks the student's growth percentile, and you can see by school what a school average percentile, growth percentile was. So all these little bubbles represent different schools. The ones in the top right corner are schools that have made a lot of growth in the last year. The bigger the bubble, the more students they have at their school. And so you can click on that. You can also filter the results depending on your school and your district. And you can kind of play around with that and see how their growth percentiles are different. If you go back to the other page, what is
I just looked at Beaver.
Oh, okay, cool.
So you want me to go?
So these are the schools in Beaver, right? So some of the schools have a higher percentile and some of them have a lower percentile. If you go back to the main page, The other thing that's really interesting is this proficiency movement. So it also comes from the student growth percentiles, but it tracks them by proficiency levels. And so in the left-hand pie chart, we see all of the fourth graders who were below proficient last year. So the whole pie represents all the students that received a 1 on their fourth grade language arts assessment last year. So I guess it was third grade, because they were in third grade. And then fourth grade, of those students, 79% of them also got a 1. But 17% are now at a 2, and 3% are at a 3. So 3% of the students moved from a 1 to a 3 in 1 year, which is really awesome. So you can kind of click on those, and it'll show you different schools, and you can filter again schools for that. So there's a lot of information that you can look at without having to have a login. And then if you go back to the PowerPoint.
Back to the PowerPoint.
Yes. She's earning her money tonight. Next slide. Oh, I can do that, huh?
Maybe.
Okay. This is actually an example of a teacher report. So you have to have an educator account to be able to look at this. But you'll notice on here, this is actually a resource class, so it's really small. There's only 6 students. And 3 of those students were not at school last year, so they don't have an SGP. But 3 students do, and you'll notice here where the arrow is their SGP. The student at the top had a 93, and so they made a lot of growth last year. And you'll notice prior year proficient is they were at a 2 last year, and now this year they're at a 4. But you'll notice down here at the bottom we have 2 students that were at a lower proficiency level last year, and they dropped proficiency levels. But one of them has a growth percentile of 35, which is close to average. So they probably either performed about similar to the way that the rest of the students in their cohort did, or they were right on the cutoff of proficient to begin with. And then another student only had 10. So as a teacher, you would look at this and you'd say, okay, this student is doing really well, and this student needs some help. And that's kind of the next step that you get to sit down with your school and say, okay, well, we noticed these students are struggling. What do we do to help them? You can look at the subcategories and see what they're struggling with. Some students usually have a category that they're doing really well and some that they're not doing so well. So you can work with the teachers and change instruction. You can, maybe they need access to Chromebooks, or maybe they need some arts integration or something like that. And that's kind of the next step that we talk about. Once you understand the data, what do you do about it? And that's actually
Our next class.
Yes.
In January.
Because I don't have all the answers. In fact, this is kind of a high overview, and especially at the state level, I don't know what's going on at your schools. You guys do. You're the only ones that know that. So you kind of work together. There's a lot of factors that influence student achievement, and you're the only ones that can decide how best to help these students. So go fight, win. I wish you the best of luck. If you have any questions, let me know. Feel free to email me or call me, and we're happy to help out. Thank you very much for your time. Oh, thank you, WebEx people. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or call me. Thank you for coming. We appreciate it.